Hey everyone, remember back in the day, maybe high school or even college, when the Constitution just felt like this solid guarantee of freedom. It was just like this sacred thing, like etched in stone practically.
Yeah.
Well, get ready for a deep dive. That might just shake up that perspective a little bit because today we're exploring Heidi Schreck's play, What the Constitution Means to Me.
Yeah, it's really wild how this play. You'd think, a play about the Constitution would be kind of dry, like a lecture or something. But it totally took off. I mean, it was a smash hit on Broadway.
I know, right?
Yeah.
And Schreck starts off by taking us back to when she was just 15 years old. Imagine her, this super psyched teenager going all over the country to these Constitution debate competitions.
And she was so into it, she even came up with this nickname for the Constitution.
Oh, really? What was that?
She called it the Crucible, which is interesting when you think about it.
Hmm. Yeah, why is that?
Well, the Crucible, that play by Arthur Miller, it's all about the Salem witch trials, right? All that
Mm.
paranoia and injustice. So for her to call the Constitution the Crucible, it's like she saw it as this intense force,
Yeah.
something that could bring people together, but also maybe, do some damage too.
Wow, I never thought about it like that. So she starts out with this almost like worshipful view of the Constitution.
Yeah, totally. She saw it as this amazing melting pot, where all these different ideas could come together and make something even stronger. But then her perspective takes this sharp turn when she uncovers some pretty dark family secrets. Turns out generations of women in her family, her mom, her grandmother, had all been victims of domestic violence.
Oh, wow. That's really heavy. So how does that connect to the Constitution?
That's where she starts to question, how much the Constitution actually protects people, especially vulnerable people. Like, does it really protect them from harm? You see, the Constitution, especially the Bill of Rights, is mostly about what are called negative rights. These are rights that are about keeping the government out of our business, like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right to bear arms.
So it's like setting limits. You're saying, hey, government, you can't do this to us. But what about the times when you need the government to actually step in and protect you? Like in cases of domestic violence.
Exactly. And that's where the whole concept of positive rights comes in. These are rights that require the government to do something, to provide something or to guarantee protection. But the Constitution, at least the way it was written originally, focuses way more on those negative rights. And that brings us to this truly heartbreaking case that Heidi talks about in the play, Castle Rock v. Gonzalez. This woman, Jessica Lenahan, she had a restraining order against her husband, who she was separated from.
Okay, so she had a legal document saying he wasn't supposed to come near her.
Mm.
What happened?
Well, her husband, he actually kidnapped their 3 daughters. He totally violated that restraining order. And even though Lenahan, begged the police to do something, they didn't really enforce the order.
He didn't. I mean, she had a restraining order. How could they not do anything?
No, it's just awful. Her husband, he actually ended up murdering all 3 of their daughters before he got killed himself in a shootout with the police.
Oh, my God.
It's just a devastating case. And so Lenahan, she sued the town.
Mm.
She argued that the police had violated her constitutional rights by not enforcing that restraining order.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like a pretty solid case to me. I mean, that restraining order was supposed to protect her and her daughters?
You'd think so, right?
Hmm.
But the Supreme Court actually ruled against her. And this is where things get really, complicated legally and kind of frustrating, honestly. The majority opinion was written by Justice Scalia, and he really focused in on this one tiny detail, the word shall in the restraining order.
Shall? What does that have to do with anything?
Well, Scalia basically argued that using the word shall didn't actually create a specific individual right to police enforcement. It was more like a general statement of policy, not necessarily a promise of action in every single case.
So even though it said the police shall enforce it, the court was basically saying, maybe not. I don't know. That's pretty hard to understand.
Yeah, it is. It's a tough case for sure. And it really highlights the limitations of the Constitution when it comes to those positive rights, the ones that say the government has to actively protect us from harm.
So you have these situations where the Constitution doesn't really seem to do what you'd expect it to do, where it doesn't offer the protection you'd think it would.
Yeah.
But Heidi, she doesn't just focus on the negative stuff. She also looks at those times when the Constitution has been interpreted in a way that's actually led to some real progress.
Oh, definitely. And one of the best examples is the Griswold v. Connecticut case. This is the one that made birth control legal nationwide.
Right, Griswold.
Yeah.
I remember learning about that in school, but I gotta admit, it's been a while.
Well, this is where we get into this fascinating idea of the penumbra. It's a term that Justice William O. Douglas came up with in his opinion on Griswold. And it basically refers to all those rights that aren't actually written down in the Constitution.
So it's like reading between the lines. You're finding rights that are implied, but not specifically spelled out.
Exactly. Think of it like a shadow, a gray area where the Constitution's lines get a little blurry. And it was in this penumbra that the court decided there was a right to privacy. And that was the whole basis for their decision in Griswold.
So even though the Constitution doesn't actually say right to privacy, the court decided it was implied by some of the other rights that are listed.
Exactly. And the impact of this concept has been massive. I mean, it's not just about birth control. The penumbra has also been used to support things like interracial marriage in the Loving v. Virginia case, and of course, the right to abortion in Roe v. Wade.
Wow. So that one case, Griswold, it really opened up this whole new way of looking at the Constitution.
It did. But as Heidi points out in her play, this penumbra thing, it can be kind of a double-edged sword.
How so? It seems like it's led to some pretty important expansions of rights.
Oh, for sure. But because these rights aren't actually written out in the Constitution, their interpretation can change, depending on who's doing the interpreting. And that brings up some big questions, like how much flexibility should the court have when they're interpreting the Constitution? And can we really count on this idea of the penumbra to protect fundamental rights in the long run?
Those are good questions.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's what Heidi is really struggling with in this play. She starts out with this almost religious view of the Constitution, but then her own family history and these court cases, they force her to confront its limitations.
Absolutely. She goes from this idealistic view to something much more complicated. She starts to see the Constitution's flaws, like how it's always been tied up with slavery and how it doesn't always protect groups that are marginalized. It's like her youthful idealism just crashes right into the reality of history and the legal system.
So she's not just talking about the Constitution as some abstract idea. She's showing how it plays out in real people's lives. And sometimes the results are really tragic.
Exactly. But she's not saying we should just chuck the whole Constitution or anything. It's more about recognizing that it's complex.
Yeah.
It has the potential for good and bad.
So where does she end up? What's her main takeaway from all of this?
Well, she doesn't really give us easy answers. It's more about getting us to think and question, She's basically saying, look, this document, it's powerful, it's shaped our country, but it's also a work in progress. It's up to us, as citizens to really grapple with how complicated it is and try to make it better reflect our values.
So she wants us to move beyond this simple view of the Constitution as either perfect and untouchable or totally broken and useless.
Right, and that's where this idea of the Constitution as a changeling comes in. It's a really powerful image that she uses. Like the Constitution itself is always changing, and so is our relationship to it. Just like a changeling can shift and adapt, so can our understanding of the Constitution.
So it's all about being open to new ways of looking at things, to challenging what we think we know, and to thinking about how the Constitution can actually be a force for positive change as we move forward.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that the Constitution isn't stuck in time. It's a living document that reflects the values and hopes of our society. And it's our job as citizens to wrestle with what it means and try to make it a better reflection of our ideals.
It really makes you think, we can't just sit back and expect the Constitution to, automatically protect all our rights. It takes work.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be engaged and really think critically and be willing to push for things to get better.
I agree. It's not enough to just memorize those amendments. We have to deal with the parts that are kind of fuzzy, the penumbras, the parts that are open to different interpretations. That's where the real work is.
Yeah. So what does that look like? I mean, practically speaking, how can we as regular people, engage with the Constitution in a way that actually matters?
Well, one thing is we got to stay informed, right? Not just about the big cases that everyone's talking about, but about all the little debates and legal stuff that's happening behind the scenes, all that stuff that shapes what our rights are going to look like going forward. Heidi's play does a really good job of showing how these legal concepts that seem really abstract, they actually have a huge impact on real people's lives.
Exactly. It's easy to get lost in all that legal mumbo jumbo.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's about real people, and what they're going through.
Totally. And besides just staying informed, we have to be willing to get involved, speak up about what we believe in and hold our elected officials accountable for actually upholding the Constitution.
Yeah. That's so true. Voting is obviously super important.
Yeah.
But it's also about those conversations we have, with our neighbors in our communities.
Yeah.
Even with our own families.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We can't leave it all up to the lawyers and judges. The Constitution belongs to all of us. It's our responsibility to make sure it reflects who we are, at our best. I really like that idea. The Constitution is a reflection of our values.
Yeah.
It's not something that's just set in stone. It changes as our ideas about justice and equality change.
Right, and that's exciting, but it's also a challenge, It means that we have this responsibility to help shape how it changes, to push for a more just and inclusive way of understanding the Constitution.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's sticking with you? What's one big takeaway from what the Constitution means to me?
For me, it's this reminder that the Constitution is alive.
Mhm.
It's not perfect, but it has this incredible potential to do good, and it's up to us to keep that potential going.
To keep it alive.
That's beautiful. And to everyone listening, I hope this deep dive has gotten you thinking about your own relationship with the Constitution. It's a document that's full of surprises and, yeah, contradictions, but also hope. So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep those conversations going. Thanks for joining us.